You're driving home late at night. The road is dark, winding. You're exhausted, and for just a split second, your eyes close. When they snap open, you've drifted toward the shoulder, but somehow, instinctively, your hands have already corrected the wheel. You're safe. Was that just reflex, muscle memory, or was something else at work? Throughout history, billions of people across every culture have reported moments like this, moments where they should have been harmed, but weren't, where the odds were impossible, yet things worked out, where they felt a presence, a guidance, a protection they couldn't explain. Today, we're going to explore one of humanity's oldest and most persistent beliefs, the idea that we are not alone, that there are forces, presences, or as many traditions call them, guardians, watching over us. We'll examine this through multiple lenses: ancient texts, historical accounts, psychological research, near-death experiences, and the testimonies of ordinary people who've experienced the extraordinary. By the end of this deep dive, you'll have a framework for understanding these experiences, whether you interpret them through faith, neuroscience, or something in between. Let's start with the foundation of this belief in Western tradition. The concept of guardian beings appears throughout Judeo-Christian scripture, but it's far more nuanced than popular culture suggests. The book of Hebrews describes these beings as ministering spirits sent to serve those who will inherit salvation. This isn't about cartoon angels with harps sitting on clouds. The original Greek word used here is liturgika pneumata, which translates more accurately to spirits engaged in public service or functionaries. Think of them less as passive observers and more as active agents with specific assignments. The imagery is governmental, bureaucratic even. There's an entire infrastructure implied here. What's particularly fascinating is how this concept evolved throughout biblical history. In the Old Testament, these beings appear as warriors, as in the story of Elisha, where an entire army of fiery chariots surrounds the prophet's city, invisible to the naked eye until revealed. They appear as travelers, as with Abraham's mysterious visitors. They appear as wrestlers, as with Jacob's nighttime encounter. The common thread isn't their appearance, but their function. They show up at pivotal moments, decision points, life or death situations, crossroads that will determine someone's entire future trajectory. They don't prevent every stubbed toe or missed bus. They intervene when the stakes reach a certain threshold. Psalm 34 introduces another dimension to this protection, describing it as a surrounding presence, like a perimeter. The Hebrew word used here suggests encampment, a military term. It evokes the image of sentries posted at intervals, maintaining watch in shifts, ensuring no gaps in coverage. This wasn't meant to be understood as a single guardian, but as a coordinated system of protection. Ancient listeners would have immediately understood this reference. Cities were vulnerable at night. Walls needed constant monitoring. A lapse in vigilance could mean invasion, destruction, death. The psalm applies this very tangible, very real security concern to the spiritual realm, suggesting that those who honor the divine receive the same level of strategic protection. But here's where it gets really interesting. Jesus adds a new layer to this understanding in the Gospel of Matthew when he warns against despising children, noting that their angels continually behold the face of the Father in heaven. This single verse has sparked centuries of theological debate. Does it mean each child has a dedicated guardian? Does it mean there's a class of spiritual beings whose specific assignment is the protection of the vulnerable? Or does it mean something else entirely?
The phrase, "their angels," is possessive, suggesting assignment or relationship. The word continually indicates ongoing, uninterrupted access. And the phrase, "behold the face," implies not just seeing, but having direct audience with, the kind of access reserved for high-ranking officials in ancient courts.
Let's pause here and consider what this system would actually look like if it were real. We're talking about an intelligence network of vast scale, billions of humans currently alive, each one with moments of genuine danger, genuine need, genuine crisis. If there truly are assigned protectors, the logistics alone are staggering. How do they coordinate? How do they prioritize? What are the rules of engagement? When do they intervene, and when do they stand back? These aren't frivolous questions. They get to the heart of one of humanity's deepest struggles, the problem of suffering. If protection exists, why isn't it universal? Why isn't it constant? Why do bad things happen to people of faith?
The traditional theological answer involves free will, natural consequences, and the difference between protection from ultimate harm versus protection from all discomfort. But there's another framework worth considering, the concept of strategic intervention. Military strategists don't defend every inch of territory with equal force. They identify critical assets, key infrastructure, vulnerable supply lines. They allocate resources based on strategic importance. If we apply this framework to divine protection, it suggests that interventions happen not randomly, but according to a larger pattern we can't fully see. A person might be protected from a car accident, not because they're more deserving than someone who wasn't, but because their survival serves a purpose in a larger story still unfolding.
Now, shift from theology to psychology, because there's fascinating research here. Studies on what psychologists call benevolent hallucinations or sensed presence experiences reveal something unexpected. These aren't limited to religious people. Mountaineers at high altitude frequently report sensing a companion beside them, offering encouragement, even guidance. Solo sailors on long voyages describe similar phenomena. Grieving people often report sensing their deceased loved ones nearby, offering comfort. Neurologically, these experiences correlate with specific patterns of brain activity, particularly in regions associated with self-awareness and spatial orientation. When these regions are stressed through exhaustion, isolation, or emotional trauma, the brain sometimes generates a sense of another presence.
Skeptics point to this research as evidence that guardian experiences are purely neurological artifacts, misfirings of an overstressed brain seeking comfort. But here's the fascinating counterpoint. What if the mechanism and the reality aren't mutually exclusive? What if these brain regions are in fact the hardware through which such presences are perceived? After all, we don't say music doesn't exist just because we can identify the ear structures and neural pathways involved in hearing. We don't say love is mere chemistry just because we can measure oxytocin and dopamine. The mechanism of perception doesn't negate the reality of what's perceived. Consider near-death experiences, which often include encounters with what people describe as guardian angels. The consistency across cultures is remarkable. People who've never heard of guardian angels, who come from Buddhist, Hindu, or secular backgrounds, report meeting beings of light who communicate without words, who convey profound love and guidance, who sometimes send them back
with specific instructions or knowledge they couldn't have possessed otherwise. Dr. Raymond Moody's research documented thousands of these cases. While some can be explained by oxygen deprivation or neurochemical floods, others include verifiable information the person couldn't have known, details about events happening in other rooms, future occurrences that later come true, or knowledge of deceased relatives they'd never met or seen photos of.
Look at some historical examples that challenge easy explanation. During World War I, multiple soldiers on both sides reported what became known as the Angels of Mons, luminous figures said to have appeared between the opposing armies. While many dismiss this as wartime myth-making, the consistency of accounts from soldiers who had no contact with each other is striking. They described the same phenomena, figures in white, sometimes with drawn swords, creating a barrier that enemy forces seemed unable or unwilling to cross. Skeptics attribute this to mass hallucination brought on by stress and sleep deprivation. But mass hallucinations typically don't share such specific, consistent details across multiple witnesses separated by distance. Then there's the case of Desmond Doss, the World War II medic who served without carrying a weapon due to his religious convictions. During the Battle of Okinawa, he single-handedly lowered 75 wounded soldiers down a cliff face under heavy fire, working through the night. He later said he felt guided, protected, as though hands were helping him that he couldn't see. Statistically, what he accomplished should have been impossible. Every military analyst who studied that engagement agrees he should have been killed within minutes. Yet he survived not just that night, but the entire war, despite repeatedly exposing himself to enemy fire to rescue others.
Or consider the phenomenon of what's called battlefield providence, documented throughout military history. Soldiers who have a sudden, inexplicable urge to move position seconds before their previous location is hit. Pilots who report hearing a voice telling them to change altitude or direction, only to learn they narrowly avoided collision. Commanding officers who describe a sudden knowing that alters their strategy, saving their unit. Are these gut instinct? Pattern recognition happening below conscious awareness, or communication from a source beyond the physical? The challenge in investigating these experiences is that they resist the kind of controlled, repeatable study that science requires. You can't summon a protective intervention on demand. You can't create a double-blind study of guardian presence. What we have, instead, are patterns in the data, statistical anomalies, clusters of improbable survivals, testimonies that share common elements across cultures and centuries. It's not proof in the scientific sense, but it's not nothing either. It's signal, not just noise. Examine another dimension, the protection that comes through human agents. Often, when people describe being helped in impossible situations, there's a person involved. A stranger who appears at exactly the right moment, with exactly what's needed, then disappears before they can be properly thanked. A phone call that comes through just as someone is at their lowest point, preventing a tragedy. A chance meeting that alters someone's entire life trajectory. Are these humans operating as vehicles for divine protection? Are they themselves unaware that they're being positioned, prompted, sent? There's a whole category of experiences called coincidence clusters, where multiple unlikely events align in ways that defy probability.
A woman misses her usual train due to a series of small delays, each one frustrating in the moment, only to learn that train derailed. A man's phone dies, forcing him to stop for a charger, and in that store he runs into someone who offers him a job that saves his failing business. A student gets lost walking to class, ends up in the wrong building, and sits in on a lecture that changes her entire academic direction. Statisticians can calculate the odds of each individual event, but the compounding probability of them all happening in sequence, creating a specific outcome, becomes astronomical.
This raises a philosophical question. Is there such a thing as meaningful coincidence? Carl Jung proposed the concept of synchronicity, acausal connections between events that share meaning but no direct causal relationship. He argued that there's an organizing principle in the universe beyond simple cause and effect, a kind of cosmic choreography that arranges encounters, experiences, and events according to patterns that serve growth, protection, or purpose. Jung's framework doesn't require belief in guardian beings, but it's compatible with such belief. It suggests that whether you attribute these patterns to divine agents, to a conscious universe, or to some aspect of reality we don't yet understand, the patterns themselves are real and observable.
Now, let's address the hardest question directly. What about when protection doesn't come? What about the person who prays desperately for safety and dies anyway? The child who suffers despite innocence? The faithful who face tragedy after tragedy? Any honest exploration of protection must grapple with its seeming absence. The traditional religious answer involves the afterlife, the idea that ultimate protection means preservation of the soul, even if the body fails, that physical death isn't the worst thing that can happen, that suffering can serve purposes we can't see. But that answer, while theologically sound within certain frameworks, offers little comfort to those in the midst of loss. In the secret hierarchy of heaven, the archangels wield the fire of God. At fifth, Raguel, avenger of justice, ensuring the harmony of the celestial realm. Fourth, Gabriel, the warrior messenger, bearer of destiny and the communication of will. Third, Uriel, the light bearer, casting the sons of judgment over the corrupt. Second, Raphael, the powerful healer whose touch restores the balance of creation. But one name stands above all others, the final weapon, the commander of the legions, the only who can defeat the ancient evil. Michael, divine protector, the sacred sword who will lead the final battle. This isn't meant to minimize real pain or justify tragedy. It's an attempt to imagine how protection might operate within a system complex enough that we can only ever see a tiny fraction of its workings. It's like watching a single frame of a movie and trying to understand the entire plot. From that one frame, the protagonist's suffering seems pointless. Only when you see the whole film does the arc become clear. The problem is, we're living in the movie, not watching it. We can't skip ahead. We can't see how it ends. All we have is this moment, this frame, and the faith or hope that it's part of a larger story that will eventually make sense. Let's return to direct experience. Across religions and spiritual traditions worldwide, practices exist for invoking or acknowledging protective presences. In Christianity, it's prayer directed to God with trust that angels will be dispatched. In Islam,
It's seeking refuge in Allah from harm, with the understanding that guardian angels record deeds and offer protection. In Buddhism, it's the invocation of bodhisattvas or protective deities, understood not as external beings necessarily, but as aspects of enlightened consciousness. In indigenous traditions, it's calling on ancestral spirits or animal guides. The specifics differ, but the framework is universal. There are helpful forces beyond the physical, and relationship matters. What's particularly interesting is that these traditions also include protocols, rules about how protection works. In Christian tradition, there's emphasis on alignment with divine will. Protection isn't a magic shield that allows reckless behavior. It's a covenant relationship. You live according to certain principles, and protection follows. It's not transactional in the sense of earning safety through good behavior, but it is relational. The protection is offered, but it must be received, and reception requires a certain posture, trust, surrender, acknowledgement of limits.
In Jewish mysticism, there's the concept of merit, both personal and ancestral. You might be protected because of your own righteousness, or because of your grandmother's prayers, or because of your grandfather's deeds. There's a web of spiritual cause and effect that extends beyond the individual, threading through families and communities across generations. Your protection might be an answer to someone else's prayer. Your survival might fulfill a promise made to an ancestor you never met. These frameworks suggest something important. Protection isn't random, but it's also not simple. It operates according to principles, relationships, and patterns that exceed our ability to fully map. That doesn't mean it's random. It means it's complex. Like quantum mechanics is complex, like ecosystems are complex, like the human immune system is complex. Our inability to predict or control it doesn't mean it's not real or not operating according to consistent laws. If you accept the possibility that protective forces exist, whether you understand them as angels, as divine providence, as the universe conspiring in your favor, or simply as statistical likelihood bending toward the improbable at key moments, how does that change how you live? It should create a certain boldness, not recklessness, but a willingness to take meaningful risks. If you believe you're protected in service of a larger purpose, you can step into situations that would otherwise paralyze you with fear. You can speak truth that needs speaking. You can pursue callings that seem impossible. You can extend yourself for others, knowing that your own safety isn't entirely in your hands. But it should also create humility. If protection comes from beyond yourself, you can't claim credit for your survival or success. That near miss wasn't because you're so clever. That opportunity wasn't purely your hard work. That healing wasn't just medicine. There's something larger at play, which means you have responsibility to use what you've been given, to honor the protection you've received, to extend help to others as you've been helped. And it creates presence. If critical interventions happen at key moments, then attention matters. Awareness matters. You have to be awake enough to notice the prompt, the intuition, the nudge. How many protective interventions do we miss because we're distracted? Because we're so locked into our plans that we can't hear the redirect? The person who might have helped us passes by unnoticed. The warning we might have heeded gets drowned out by noise. The door that opens goes unwalked through because we're too busy forcing our way through the wall.
Let's talk about the physical sensations people report in connection with these experiences. There's remarkable consistency here too. A sudden peace in the midst of chaos, a warmth that spreads through the chest, a sense of being held even when alone, goosebumps or tingling along the spine, a knowing that everything will be okay despite circumstances suggesting otherwise. Neurologically, some of these correspond to parasympathetic nervous system activation, the body's rest and digest response, which seems paradoxical in moments of danger. Why would the body calm in crisis unless the calm is a signal, unless it's communication that despite appearances, you're safe?
Then there are the dreams and visions people report before or after significant events. A vivid dream of a deceased grandmother appearing with a warning that prevents disaster. A vision of light surrounding a loved one who's traveling and later learning they survived an accident. A sense of being shown something that later proves crucial. The skeptical explanation involves precognition, which science largely rejects, or cognitive bias, where we remember the hits and forget the misses. But again, the patterns persist across too many cultures, too many centuries, too many credible witnesses to dismiss entirely.
Consider the protection that comes through provision, not just safety from harm, but supply of need. The unexpected check that arrives the day before eviction, the job offer that comes through after months of rejection, the person who happens to have exactly the skill or resource required appearing at exactly the right time. If you've lived long enough, you've probably experienced this yourself. That moment when you're at the end of your resources and something shifts, a way opens, help arrives. Is it just probability? Enough people in enough situations, some are bound to get lucky? Or is there orchestration happening?
The biblical tradition speaks of angels as messengers, which is actually the literal meaning of the word in both Hebrew and Greek. They carry information, instructions, warnings. They announce births and deaths. They clarify calling and purpose. If we extend this concept, every meaningful message that arrives at exactly the right time could be understood as angelic. The article you stumble across that answers your question, the song that plays with lyrics that speak directly to your situation, the sermon or podcast or conversation that addresses precisely what you're wrestling with. The content arrives through human agents and natural means, but the timing, the specificity, the impact suggests coordination.
This opens up a whole category of protection we might call protective information. You're kept safe not through physical intervention, but through knowledge that guides your decisions. You learn something that causes you to change plans, and those changed plans mean you're not in the wrong place at the wrong time. You gain insight that helps you recognize a toxic relationship or dangerous situation before you're too deep. You receive wisdom that steers your life in a direction that years later you recognize as having saved you from disaster you couldn't see coming. There's also protection through delay and redirection, the missed flight that saves your life, the rejected job application that keeps you available for a better opportunity, the broken relationship that hurt terribly in the moment but spared you from worse pain later. Looking backward, we can sometimes see these patterns clearly. The path we didn't take led to a cliff we couldn't see. The door that closed in our face was actually mercy. The detour was the real route. But in the moment, it just feels like frustration, failure, loss. This is where trust becomes crucial. If you believe in protective presence, you have to extend that belief to the no's as much as the yeses.
The blocked path is as much protection as the clear road, maybe more so, because the clear road doesn't require faith, the blocked path does. It demands that you believe there's intelligence behind the obstruction, purpose in the delay, even when you can't see it. Let's address the scientific materialist perspective head-on, because it deserves serious consideration. This worldview holds that consciousness is generated by brain activity, that when the brain dies, consciousness ceases, that there is no soul, no afterlife, no divine realm, and therefore no angels. Protective experiences are explained through a combination of probability, cognitive bias, neurochemistry, and evolutionary psychology. Humans are pattern-seeking creatures who find meaning in randomness. Our brains are wired to see agency where there is none, because evolutionarily, false positives were safer than false negatives. Better to see the lion that isn't there than to miss the one that is.
This explanation accounts for a lot. It explains why people across cultures report similar experiences despite having different theological interpretations. It explains why protective feelings correlate with specific brain states. It explains prayer and meditation, regardless of theological truth, have measurable psychological and physiological benefits. If you accept this framework, divine protection becomes a useful fiction, a psychological tool that helps humans cope with the fundamental uncertainty and danger of existence, but not something actually real. The question is, does this explanation account for everything? Does it explain the verifiable information gained during near-death experiences? Does it explain the statistical anomalies, the improbable survivals, the specific and accurate premonitions? Does it explain the cases where intervention comes through strangers who appear and vanish, who know things they shouldn't, who provide exactly what's needed in ways that exceed coincidence? Materialist science says not yet, but eventually we'll find natural explanations for it all. Faith traditions say you're explaining the mechanism but missing the meaning, describing the tool but ignoring the user. Perhaps both frameworks are incomplete. Perhaps reality is more complex than either pure materialism or pure spiritualism allows. Perhaps consciousness is both generated by and extends beyond the brain. Perhaps angels are both neurological constructs and real entities. Perhaps light is both particle and wave. Perhaps protection is both statistical probability playing out across billions of human lives and intentional intervention from a realm beyond the physical. Perhaps God works through natural means precisely because natural means exist, because the divine doesn't need to violate physics to accomplish divine purposes.
Across all cultures and all of recorded history, persistent reports of protective presences. These reports share common elements: timing, specificity, impact disproportionate to visible cause. They correlate with certain practices: prayer, meditation, right living, faith. They result in measurable outcomes: survival against odds, provision of mead, guidance through crisis. Whether you attribute these to divine agents, to unconscious pattern recognition, to quantum probability, or to some combination of all three, the phenomena themselves are real. People are helped, lives are saved, hope is maintained, courage is found. And maybe that's enough. Maybe the point isn't to definitively prove or disprove guardian presence. Maybe the point is to live as though you're watched over, cared for, guided.
because that belief, regardless of its metaphysical truth, changes how you move through the world. It makes you braver, it makes you kinder, it makes you more attentive to moments of grace, more grateful for near misses, more humble about your survival and success. It connects you to something larger than yourself, whether that something is God, the universe, collective consciousness, or simply the accumulated prayers and hopes of everyone who's loved you. So here's the invitation as we close. Pay attention. Notice the patterns in your own life, the times things worked out despite the odds, the help that arrived exactly when needed, the warnings you heeded that saved you from harm, the doors that opened and the ones that closed. Don't dismiss these as mere coincidence, but don't manufacture meaning where there is none. Hold both possibilities, that you're part of a natural universe of cause and effect, and that you're held by intelligence and love that exceed your understanding. Live with both the responsibility of free will and the comfort of protection. Make wise choices as though everything depends on you, and trust deeply as though everything depends on grace. Because maybe both are true. Maybe you're more protected than you know, and that protection is calling you towards something larger, something that requires both your courage and your trust, both your action and your surrender.